The locomotive thundered through the cold night somewhere in occupied France. Steam rose from its belly like the breath of a great iron beast. The German engineer fed coal into the firebox, maintaining pressure, keeping the train loaded with military supplies moving toward the Eastern Front. He grabbed another shovel of coal, tossed it into the flames, and the world exploded. Metal screamed as the boiler ruptured. Superheated steam erupted in every direction. The locomotive lurched off the tracks, dragging wagons filled with weapons, ammunition, and supplies into a twisted mass of wreckage. By the time the flames died down, another critical supply line had been severed. German investigators would comb through the debris for hours, searching for answers. They would find nothing, because the weapon that destroyed this train looked exactly like the coal that powered it. If you find yourself gripped by this story of shadow warfare and ingenious sabotage, consider subscribing to follow along with more untold histories of the Second World War. Now let us return to the darkness where this weapon was born. The story of explosive coal begins not in the laboratories of wartime Britain, but in the fires of the American Civil War. In 1863, an Irish immigrant named Thomas Edgeworth Courtney stood before Confederate President Jefferson Davis with an audacious proposal. Courtney understood something fundamental about industrial warfare. The Union's steamships, locomotives, and factories all shared one vulnerability. They burned coal. Mountains of it sat unguarded in depots and along riverbanks, fueling the enemy war machine. What if that very fuel could be turned into a weapon? Courtney's concept was elegant in its simplicity. Create hollow iron castings shaped exactly like lumps of coal, fill them with gunpowder, seal them, coat them in coal tar and coal dust, and slip them into enemy coal supplies. Sooner or later, an unknowing fireman would shovel one into a furnace. The resulting explosion would rupture steam boilers, destroying ships, locomotives, and lives. The Confederate government approved the design, and by January 1864, the Tredegar Foundry in Richmond was producing coal torpedoes. The manufacturing process resembled artillery shell production. Workers used actual pieces of coal as patterns for iron castings. Walls of the shell measured nearly 2 centimeters thick, creating space for roughly 100 grams of gunpowder. After filling, the shell was closed with a threaded plug, then dipped in melted beeswax and rolled in coal dust. The finished product was virtually indistinguishable from genuine coal. Courtney recruited 25 men familiar with ships and ports to deploy these devices. Their targets ranged from Union blockade vessels to steam locomotives crossing Confederate territory. The first confirmed attack came on November 27, 1864, when an explosion shattered Major General Benjamin Butler's personal steamer, the Greyhound. Admiral David Porter and several staff officers were aboard. They escaped with their lives, but the ship burned to the waterline. Evidence pointed to a coal bomb unknowingly fed into the furnace during recent coaling. The psychological impact proved equally devastating. Once Union commanders learned of the threat, Admiral Porter issued General Order 184, threatening immediate execution for anyone caught placing coal bombs. Suddenly, vast resources had to be diverted to guard previously ignored coal stocks. The coal torpedo's genius lay not merely in its destructive potential, but in the doubt it planted. Every lump of coal became suspect. This concept lay dormant for decades after the Civil War ended. Courtney traveled to England attempting to sell his invention to foreign governments. He approached the British, the Prussians, the Italians, the Turks. None purchased his weapon. He died in 1875, never having profited from his creation. But the idea refused to die with him. When Europe plunged into the Great War in 1914, coal remained the lifeblood of industrial civilization. Every nation depended on it for transportation, manufacturing, and warmth. German saboteurs recognized its vulnerability. In July 1916, they caused a massive explosion at the Black Tom Island Munitions Depot in New York Harbor, eliminating 4 people and causing damage equivalent to nearly 500 million modern dollars. Coal bombs appeared aboard ships leaving American ports. In March 1918, one was discovered in a coal delivery destined for a Michigan power plant. German agents were suspected in each case, but it was the Second World War that elevated the coal bomb from curiosity to strategic weapon. In May 1940, as Hitler's armies swept across Europe, Britain faced its darkest hour. France had fallen. The British Expeditionary Force had barely escaped at Dunkirk. Nazi Germany controlled the continent from Norway to Spain. Prime Minister Winston Churchill needed a way to strike back, to keep hope alive in occupied nations, to make the Germans pay for every mile they held. On July 22, 1940, Churchill authorized the creation of the Special Operations Executive. His directive was simple: set Europe ablaze. The SOE would operate in the shadows. Its agents would infiltrate occupied territories, organize resistance networks, and wage a campaign of sabotage against German infrastructure. They needed weapons unlike any conventional army carried. Weapons that could be hidden, disguised, and deployed by ordinary citizens who had never worn a uniform. The scientists and engineers tasked with creating these tools worked at research stations near Welwyn in Hertfordshire. Among their earliest creations was a modernized version of Courtney's coal torpedo. The Second World War coal bomb represented a significant evolution from its Civil War ancestor. Perhaps the most important change was the use of newly improved plastic explosives in place of black powder. This innovation dramatically increased each device's destructive potential while eliminating the need for heavy iron casings. Suddenly, the bombs could be lighter, easier to transport, and deadlier. SOE technicians developed a complete coal bomb kit for field agents. Early versions included a coal borer, a specialized tool that allowed operatives to drill holes in actual lumps of coal and fill them with plastic explosive and a detonator. This approach was soon superseded by something more sophisticated: molded fake coal crafted from plaster and painted to match local coal supplies. Each kit included paints and instructions, enabling agents to adapt the bombs to the color and texture of coal from any region of occupied Europe. The kits also included detailed guidance on placement and timing. Agents learned to identify the most vulnerable points in enemy infrastructure: railway coal tenders, ship bunkers, factory furnaces, power station fuel supplies. A single bomb placed in the right location could disable a locomotive, sink a vessel, or halt production at a critical manufacturing plant. New fusing technology expanded the weapon's tactical possibilities. No longer was the coal bomb solely a random device waiting for some unknowing worker to shovel it into a fire. Timed fuses and remotely detonated triggers allowed for specifically targeted attacks. An agent could plant a bomb in a coal pile aboard a particular ship, set a delay, and be miles away when the explosion occurred. Across the Atlantic, the Americans were developing their own version. The Office of Strategic Services, created in June 1942, was led by William Donovan, a lawyer and World War I Medal of Honor recipient who believed in unconventional warfare. Donovan recruited Stanley Platt Lovell, a brilliant industrial chemist and former Harvard professor, to lead the OSS Research and Development Branch. Lovell embraced his mission with enthusiasm bordering on glee. He would later describe himself as the Professor Moriarty of the American war effort. Lovell's team developed an American coal bomb using a high-explosive compound called pentalite, a mixture of PETN and TNT. The explosive was cast into mold formed from actual lumps of coal. The exterior was reinforced with black enameled scrim to prevent breakage during handling. An igniter of lead styphnate was sealed in one end with waterproofing material. The entire device was then coated with plastic cement containing lampblack, making it virtually indistinguishable from real coal. Like their British counterparts, The OSS included camouflage kits that enabled agents to match the bombs to local coal stocks. This was crucial. Coal varies widely in color and texture depending on where it was mined. Anthracite from Pennsylvania looks different from bituminous coal from the Ruhr Valley. A bomb that appeared authentic in one region might stand out glaringly in another. The camouflage kits allowed operatives to adapt on the ground. Field testing proved the OSS coal bomb's devastating effectiveness. In one test, a bomb placed in a locomotive firebox destroyed the entire firebox assembly. Technicians noted that had the boiler been under pressure, as it would be during normal operation, the explosion would have been catastrophically amplified. Another test placed a bomb in a building's fireplace. The detonation lifted the roof, blew out windows, shattered interior walls, damaged exterior structures, and knocked the porch several inches away from the main building. The OSS freely shared its coal bomb technology with the British SOE. By war's end, an estimated 3.5 tons of explosive coal had been manufactured between 1941 and 1945. Some were pure explosive devices. Others were incendiaries, designed not to detonate instantly, but to start fires in coal bunkers and storage facilities. Coal fires are notoriously difficult to contain and nearly impossible to extinguish quickly. A single incendiary device could destroy an entire depot. The Germans knew about coal bombs. They had developed their own versions. In June 1942, 8 German saboteurs landed from submarines on beaches in New York and Florida as part of Operation Pastorius. Their mission was to attack American infrastructure, including coal-fired power plants. When FBI agents arrested them and recovered their caches, they found several coal bombs alongside other explosives and sabotage equipment. The German Abwehr, military intelligence's sabotage branch, also supplied coal bombs to double agents. In March 1943, they gave 2 coal bombs to Eddie Chapman, a British criminal turned spy known as Agent Zigzag. Chapman was supposed to use them to sabotage the British merchant ship City of Lancaster while it crossed the Atlantic. Instead, he handed them over to his MI5 handlers. British intelligence staged an elaborate fake search of the ship upon its arrival in Glasgow, pretending to discover the bombs to protect Chapman's cover as a German agent. Even the Japanese developed explosive coal during the war. Their version used a ceramic shell painted with black bitumen paint and filled with RDX, a powerful military explosive. Whether any Japanese coal bombs were actually deployed in combat remains unclear. But the true impact of explosive coal transcended individual explosions. Its greatest power lay in the fear it generated. Think about the logistical nightmare facing German occupation forces. Coal was everywhere. Every factory, every locomotive, every ship in the Reich's vast war machine depended on it. Coal supplies sat in open depots, in ship holds, in railway tenders, in factory yards. Before explosive coal, this fuel required no security. Why guard rocks? Now consider what happened when the Germans learned that the enemy had developed a bomb that looked exactly like coal. Suddenly, every lump in every coal pile in every occupied territory became potentially lethal. Every fireman shoveling coal into a furnace risked triggering an explosion. Every ship taking on coal in a contested port might be loading its own destruction. The occupiers faced an impossible choice. They could accept the risk and watch locomotives explode, ships sink, factories burn, or they could divert precious military resources away from frontline duties to guard coal supplies across an entire continent. There was no good answer. The Germans chose security, and the cost was staggering. In some regions, occupation forces ended up assigning half their available troops to railroad security alone. They built watchtowers along rail lines. They constructed bunkers and fortified positions at coal depots. They deployed armored trains to patrol critical routes. They cut down forests for hundreds of meters along railway tracks to deny cover to partisans. They forcibly evacuated entire villages suspected of harboring resistance fighters. None of it was enough. The partisan network supported by SOE and later OSS proved endlessly adaptable. When the Germans fortified one location, attack shifted to another. When patrols increased on main lines, saboteurs struck branch lines. The more resources the Germans poured into security, the fewer they had available for actual combat operations. This was asymmetric warfare at its most effective. The numbers tell the story. Polish resistance groups alone conducted approximately 29,000 acts of railway sabotage between 1941 and 1944. They damaged 6,930 locomotives. They damaged 19,058 railway wagons. They derailed 732 transports. They set 443 transports on fire. They destroyed 38 railway bridges. If you are appreciating this journey through the shadow war that crippled the Nazi war machine, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring these forgotten histories to light. Now let us continue into the heart of the resistance. France became the crucible of railway sabotage as the Allies prepared for the Normandy invasion. By early 1944, the Germans knew an invasion was coming. They just did not know where or when. What they did know was that defending against an amphibious assault required the ability to move reinforcements quickly from rear areas to the invasion beaches. That meant railways. The French rail network would determine whether German panzer divisions could counterattack before the Allies established a beachhead. The SOE and American counterparts had spent years building resistance networks throughout France. They had trained thousands of fighters. They had stockpiled weapons, explosives, and sabotage equipment, including coal bombs and railway charges. As D-Day approached, these networks activated with devastating effect. Railway workers proved especially valuable. Many French cheminots, as the railroad workers were called, had joined the resistance. They knew the rail system intimately. They knew which lines carried the most traffic. They knew where trains were vulnerable. They knew the schedules and the weak points. And, crucially, they had access. The Fer Réseau, the iron network, brought together railway workers committed to sabotaging their own trains. They did not need to carry weapons through checkpoints or sneak past guards. They belonged there. A railwayman adjusting a coupling, a signalman checking a switch, a fireman loading coal. Each had opportunities for sabotage that outsiders could never match. Some acts of resistance were violent, explosives placed on tracks, coal bombs slipped into tenders, bridges destroyed in the dead of night. But equally effective were nonviolent tactics, intentional delays, misdirected shipments, mysterious mechanical failures. Trains that should have arrived in hours took days. Supplies destined for one location ended up somewhere else entirely. The entire system became unreliable. The SOE developed specialized tools for railway destruction. The descriptive catalog of special devices and supplies documented methods that agents could use to disable rail lines with minimal explosive. One technique, known as the French method, used pairs of fog signals placed on the track ahead of explosive charges. When a train's wheels crushed the fog signals, they fired and ignited det cord connected to charges fixed to the rail. The resulting blast removed about a meter of track, derailing the locomotive and wrecking the train. The catalog also described charges specifically designed to destroy rails with maximum efficiency and minimum material. Agents learned exactly where to place explosives for greatest effect. Not random placement, but precise positioning that would guarantee derailment. 2 3/4-pound charges placed correctly could disable an entire train. Records suggest that approximately 48,000 railway charge kits were produced by SOE during the war. Each kit enabled trained operatives or resistance fighters to destroy a section of rail line. Multiply 48,000 by the resources required to repair each incident, to investigate each attack, to guard against future operations, and the cumulative impact becomes clear. Historian Richard J. Crampton estimated that resistance operations destroyed or delayed 1/8 of all German transports heading to the Eastern Front. 1/8. That meant divisions that should have arrived at critical moments reached the front, late or not at all. Ammunition that should have supplied key offensives never arrived. Fuel that tanks desperately needed sat burning in wrecked freight cars. The Eastern Front consumed German manpower and material at a staggering rate. The Wehrmacht could not afford to lose 1/8 of its supplies to partisans. But that was exactly what happened. Not every coal bomb story ended in success. The weapon had limitations. It was random in a way that made precise targeting difficult. You could place a bomb in a coal pile, but you could not control when or even if it would be shoveled into a furnace. Bombs might sit for days, weeks, or months before detonation. They might be transferred to a different location entirely. They might be discovered before use. The Germans became increasingly vigilant. Coal handlers learned to look for irregularities, weight differences, subtle color variations, suspicious seams. Some bombs were discovered before they could do any damage. Others were found after their fuses failed. The resistance adapted, improving their techniques, but the cat-and-mouse game never entirely favored one side. Weather and storage conditions also created problems. Bombs left too long in coal piles could become damaged or waterlogged. Fuses could fail in cold or wet conditions. The plasticizers in the explosive compound could degrade over time. Field conditions were never as controlled as laboratory testing, and there was always the human cost. Railway sabotage brought savage reprisals. The Germans murdered hostages in response to attacks. Entire villages were destroyed on suspicion of harboring partisans. Captured resistance fighters faced torture and execution. French railwaymen who joined the sabotage campaign knew they were risking their lives and the lives of their families. Many were caught. Many died. The coal bomb was one weapon among many in a vast and brutal shadow war. Its contribution cannot be precisely measured. How do you count the locomotives that were never destroyed because German troops were busy guarding coal piles instead of fighting at the front? How do you measure the psychological impact on a fireman who knew that any shovelful of coal might be his last? What we can say with certainty is that explosive coal embodied the genius of irregular warfare. It took the enemy's greatest strength, its industrial power, its dependence on coal, and transformed it into vulnerability. It forced the occupiers to divert resources from combat to security. It created an atmosphere of paranoia and distrust that corroded morale. It demonstrated that even the mightiest war machine could be attacked from within. The Normandy invasion on June 6, 1944, succeeded in part because German reinforcements could not reach the beaches in time. Panzer divisions that should have counterattacked within hours of the landings were delayed by damaged rail lines, destroyed bridges, and a transportation network in chaos. Every hour of delay gave Allied forces more time to establish their beachhead, to bring more troops and equipment ashore, to prepare for the counterattacks that eventually came. History remembers the soldiers who stormed the beaches. It remembers the generals who planned the invasion. It remembers the ships and planes and tanks, but somewhere in that story there should also be room for the anonymous agents who slipped coal bombs into enemy fuel supplies, for the railway workers who risked everything to sabotage their own trains, for the engineers who designed weapons so simple they could be deployed by anyone with the courage to use them. The coal bomb represented something larger than itself. It represented the democratization of warfare. You did not need a uniform to fight back against occupation. You did not need military training or heavy weapons. You needed courage, commitment, and sometimes just a lump of fake coal. After the war ended, the coal bomb faded from public memory. The world moved on to nuclear weapons and jet aircraft, and the Cold War struggles that would shape the next half-century. Coal itself gradually lost its central role in the global economy as oil and natural gas and eventually renewable energy sources took its place. But the concept lived on. The CIA reportedly prepared explosive coal for use against North Vietnamese railways during the Vietnam War, though details remain classified. The basic principle, disguising weapons as everyday objects to strike at enemy infrastructure, continued to influence unconventional warfare thinking for decades. Stanley Lovell, the chemist who led OSS research and development, wrote about his wartime experiences after the conflict ended. He described a world of ingenious devices and daring operations, of scientists working to create weapons that violated every gentlemanly rule of warfare. The coal bomb was just one of his creations, but it captured something essential about the way the Shadow War was fought. The SOE was dissolved in January 1946. Its records were classified for decades. Many of its operations remained secret long after the participants had died. Only gradually, as archives opened and historians gained access to previously restricted materials, did the full story of the sabotage campaign emerge. What emerged was a portrait of extraordinary courage and ingenuity, of ordinary people who chose to resist occupation at the risk of their lives, of scientists and engineers who created weapons designed not for armies, but for individuals, of a war fought not just on battlefields but in coal yards and railway stations and factory furnaces across an occupied continent. The locomotive that exploded on that French rail line all those years ago was just one of countless similar incidents, one train among thousands that never reached their destinations, one piece of destroyed infrastructure among tens of thousands of acts of sabotage, one moment in a shadow war that helped determine the fate of nations. The German engineer who shoveled that fatal lump of coal into the firebox never knew what eliminated him. He was just doing his job, keeping the train moving, maintaining pressure in the boiler. He had no way of knowing that the fuel itself had been turned into a weapon, that somewhere a resistance fighter had placed a carefully disguised bomb in the coal supply, that the very act of powering the train would trigger its destruction. That was the genius of explosive coal. It turned the enemy's strength against itself. It required no complex deployment, no elaborate planning, no military force, just a lump of fake coal placed in the right location, waiting for the inevitable moment when someone would feed it to the flames. The Second World War was decided by many factors: industrial capacity, military strategy, political will, the bravery of millions of soldiers on both sides. But somewhere in that vast equation, there should be room for the small things. The weapons that did not look like weapons, the attacks that left no trace, the bombs that hid in plain sight. Thomas Edgeworth Courtenay died in 1875, never knowing that his invention would help bring down a continental empire 8 decades later. He spent his final years trying unsuccessfully to sell his coal torpedo to anyone who would buy it. No government was interested. The world had moved on from the Civil War that gave birth to his creation. But ideas have a way of outliving their creators. The coal bomb that Courtenay invented in Confederate Richmond found new life in the laboratories of wartime Britain. The concept that once targeted Union steamboats was refined and improved and deployed against Nazi locomotives. The weapon that was too clever to find buyers in the 1860s helped liberate Europe in the 1940s. History rarely moves in straight lines. It loops and doubles back. Old ideas resurface in new contexts. Forgotten weapons are rediscovered and reinvented. The coal bomb is a reminder that innovation does not always mean complexity. Sometimes the most effective weapons are the simplest. Sometimes genius lies not in creating something entirely new, but in seeing familiar objects in an entirely new way. The next time you see a pile of coal, if you ever do in this age of cleaner energy, consider what it represented during the dark years of occupation. Fuel for the enemy's war machine, certainly, but also potential weapon for those who knew how to use it. A symbol of industrial vulnerability. A reminder that even the mightiest powers depend on resources they cannot fully protect. The shadow war that helped win the Second World War was fought with many weapons: coded radio transmissions, forged documents, silenced pistols, plastic explosives, and lumps of fake coal hidden in plain sight, waiting to destroy the machines they were meant to power. Thank you for joining this exploration of one of the most ingenious weapons of the Second World War. If you found this history compelling, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with others who appreciate the untold stories of history. The shadow warriors who placed those coal bombs in enemy fuel supplies have largely been forgotten. But their courage and ingenuity deserve to be remembered.